Hi everyone, I'm Melinda Spalding. Welcome to Fox 26 After the Newscast. Today we're continuing our discussion from our 5 p.m. newscast today about domestic violence, particularly in light of the Ray Rice video that came out today. We're joined now by Rebecca White of the Houston Area Women's Center, also Nate Griffin from Sports Radio 610, and Jolanda Jones, attorney and domestic violence victim. So we are kind of picking up after the newscast, have more time to talk and let it breathe from where we left off. And Jolanda, you really educated me about something as we were talking. We were talking about Mrs. Rice, Janae Rice, how many people are wondering why she chose to stay or to marry him. And you say it's not a choice the way we think of it.
No, you, in addition to asking
and
about
you also may have chosen to
that
stay in your marriage. Yeah, so explain your position.
Well, I think that if you've ever been a person in those shoes, if you've ever been a victim, it's not a choice. You know, I've heard people talking about, you know, is it about the money? When I first started dating my ex-husband, I was the person who had a job. He was an athlete. You know, it's against the NCAA rules to get money. I was working. I was in a minority recruited admissions counselor at the University of Houston. I had $10,000 saved in the bank. I loved him. He needed glasses. I bought him glasses. I had my own car that was paid for, and I had my own apartment. And he was in college. And I literally gave away my independence because he would say things that would make me believe that we were a family, and if I loved our family, then I would make these sacrifices. So when he needed glasses, I bought him glasses. If he needed this, I bought him that. Depleted the $10,000. I had a car. He knew he was going to go pro. He said that he was embarrassed of my car. His girlfriend and ultimately his wife shouldn't be driving a raggedy car like that. So I gave my car, even though in his eyes it was raggedy, but it was my first car, to my sister. And so then he got a job offer. He got drafted by the Sixers. That didn't work out because they didn't pay him as much as he wanted to be paid. So he got a job in Spain, making a whole bunch of money, cash, tax-free US dollars, close to $1 million. So he asked me to quit my job to be with him because we were a family.
And when the abuse started taking place in your marriage?
No, it started before my marriage.
Okay, so help us all understand. Are you saying you didn't feel like you had a choice because you loved him? Explain what you mean by it's not a choice.
Well, I loved him, and they separate you. They say things to you. They eat away at you. So he told me I was fat. I've been the same size for 25 years. He told me I was stupid. He told me men wouldn't want to date me because I was used goods. I wasn't a virgin. And I believed him because you listen to people and you value what people who you love say. You know, if I would go spend time with my mom or my sisters, you know, or brothers, he would be like, well, if you love me, you would stay here with me. So eventually I was alienated from my friends. I was alienated from my family. No one even knew I was still in Houston, and I was. And so before it was all over, then I'd gone to Spain. He abused me there. He hit me in the stomach when I was 6 months pregnant with our child. I'm very lucky that, you know, I had a healthy baby who's now 22, and he's great. And I was in Spain being abused, being cheated on, and I didn't have anywhere to go. I couldn't fly back to the States. I didn't have any money. I'd quit my job to be with him. He said he would take care of everything. He didn't. And then when I got back, I hadn't worked. You know, I had not worked. I quit my job in '91 for him. And I hadn't worked for 5 years. Where do you go to get a job?
And this goes along with what you were saying, that you and a lot of women like you don't have a choice the way a woman like me may think of a choice.
Oh, I applied for welfare, and they said I didn't qualify. So what was I supposed to do? How was I supposed to feed my family?
Rebecca, you hear stories like Jolanda's, unfortunately, pretty often about women feeling devalued and that they have no choice or no option. Tell me about that.
We do, and she described it beautifully. I can't say it more articulately than she just did. But we also see women who whose partners have told them that if they leave, they will kill them. And they see that happen on the news often enough. 30 women lost their lives in 2012 to domestic violence in Harris County alone. So they know it could happen. Or they say they will harm their children, or they will deport them, or they will harm themselves. And all of those threats can really control what your world of options looks like.
And this conversation started because we were talking about the reaction, Nate, to Janae Rice, and she's getting, unfortunately, on social media, a lot of the blame, a lot of people wondering, well, why did she defend him, or why did she stay, or why did she marry him? Let's talk about the flip side. And let's talk about Ray Rice. We know that he apologized and he
Sure.
went before the cameras and said he was going to therapy and do the whole deal. What do you think the NFL, the Ravens made their choice today, but what do you think the NFL can do in the future? Because we talked off camera and we won't mention any names, but he's not the first athlete who's done this. He was caught on camera. Not the first man or woman who has done this. We have to remember that women can also be the abusers.
Right.
What do you think the NFL can do?
Well, I think the NFL obviously needs to institute stiffer penalties. I think that's first and foremost. I think you have to institute the threat of a penalty, especially in your situation. I'm so sorry to hear about that. It's like, am I sitting on the right panel here? But you know, you kind of wonder. It's tough. But the NFL, unless they do something like this, institute a stiffer penalty, I really don't see guys making changes. And it all comes from, it starts at home. That's where charity begins. It begins at home. But then once these young men start to accumulate wealth, it's upon the NFL, because of the type property they are, one of the richest properties, one of the richest businesses in America. It's up to them to maintain their status as that, and to do that, they have to put people in place to train these young athletes so that they understand they're not only damaging their own brand, they're also damaging the brand of the NFL if they continue to do things like this.
Can I ask you, Nate, because you get a very unique perspective, athlete also covering sports, you're in locker rooms, you're around the guys.
Right.
I covered sports, spent a fair share of time in locker rooms. It's a different animal. It's a different ballgame. People don't realize, the fans, just the difference in the level of worship, of hero worship, and the attitude. Not all athletes. There are a lot of good guys out there, especially on the Texans, but there is kind of a perception that they're kind of above the law and above the rules.
They're on both sides, Melinda. As an athlete, a former college athlete, and as a reporter, analyst, anchor, covering sports, and you see it all the time. And it's just, so in fact, we were talking about that, how we feel athletes are above the law. I didn't feel like I was above the law, although there might have been things in my teenage years that I would have done, or that I did do, that people might have seen as being above the law. But I think that there are guys who feel like they are above the law because of what their talent offers, because I can make money for an organization. Fans want to see me, you know, on what is it, the media.
Right.
You know, I'm big in media. I'm big there. I'm big with my team. I do a lot of great things for my team that generate dollars. And that's what the owners look at. They look at how much money is this guy making for me. And sometimes because of that, they get away with the things we saw from Ray Rice. That has to stop. The owners are going to have to start policing themselves even more now. And how do you do that? Is Roger Goodell the guy to do that? I don't think he is. I think at this point, because he's done so much damage, and the thing is, when he was first hired, he actually came out as a police. He was going to be a very, very strong police. He was going to police the league. He was just going to, you know, and you look at the situation with the young man, Josh Gordon, wide receiver at Cleveland. They actually suspended him. He suspended him for a year for smoking marijuana, which this country is thinking about legalizing. Okay, so you look at the Ray Rice situation, and he only gets 2 games.
So,
except that you're talking about the league, and I think you got to go before that.
oh, absolutely. But I wanted to talk to Rebecca and to you also, Jolanda, about the value of women. I mean, what does this say when the penalty for smoking marijuana is much greater than the penalty for domestic violence? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you make a very valid point, and it does speak to, and it's not completely out of line with other things that we see about women in our culture. I think it's a great opportunity. I do think, yes, they are making a lot of money. Football players, basketball players, owners, coaches, they have an opportunity to send a message now. They really do. And as kids are forming their views of what healthy relationships look like, that there is no tolerance for what we saw in that video today, I think that's very powerful.
That's not the picture we should be showing our daughter. Absolutely.
But I also think that the league doing something is important, because you have young boys who want to go to the league, whether it's the NFL or the NBA, and if they see you can't play if you do that, then perhaps they modify their behavior. But the way domestic abuse or domestic violence, I prefer domestic violence because it's violent.
That video was violent.
The way that it is looked at, it's emblematic of society. This is a paternalistic society. Women make 77 cents every dollar a man makes. It's just an offshoot. You know, a lot of men believe in the traditional relationship where the man does this and the woman is submissive. If you share your opinion, then you're being disrespectful. And that's just what you see. And I think it's a dialogue. Like, one of the things, I have a son. I don't have a daughter. But I raised my son to not treat women like his dad treated me. And I told my son, there's a deal breaker for me. If I hear you ever put your hand on a woman, I will disown you. That's how important it is to me. Because whoever you date, and by the way, my son is a gentleman, he's a catch for anybody, but whoever you date could potentially be your wife, could potentially be the mother of your child. And she is a daughter. She is maybe going to be a mother. She is a sister. And you didn't like when your dad abused me. He remembered it. The crazy thing is, this happened when he was younger. I thought he didn't know. And I can remember one time he said to me, Mommy, do you remember when my daddy used to pull your hair?
Oh, gosh.
And I thought he didn't know because he was little. But, you know, if you think about it, you're living in a small apartment, and he can hear what's going on in that room, whether he actually sees it or not. And so that's why I thought it was just really important that I teach him this is unacceptable. So the question for the NFL is, remember Ray Caruth? Okay? Remember Ray Caruth?
Yes.
And you would think that after Ray Caruth.
And just for our viewers to know, where a woman died.
Yeah, and he played for the Panthers.
Right.
And he killed her violently. And I believe she was pregnant, if my memory serves me correctly.
And he was convicted, so this is not an alleged thing. He was convicted,
So it's not like they didn't have the opportunity then. So I'm looking forward to seeing how they're going to deal with this.
Nate, go ahead.
Conversely, I have a daughter, 17 years old, and my wife and I have told her, please, don't be afraid to voice your opinion. And if a man lays a hand on you, let daddy know. Let him know, and daddy will take care of it. And I can guarantee you that there are a lot of fathers out here that feel the same way. You don't hit another man's daughter, and that's the way I see my wife, as another man's daughter.
Let me say something. When you shame victims and when you victimize them more like they're doing with Janae, here's what happens. What if the only mistake in your daughter's life is she falls in love with an abusive guy? What if that's the only mistake she ever makes? And you make sidebar comments about, well, it's her fault, or why'd she do it, or why'd she stay, or whatever. I don't care how old she is. She is your daughter.
I can tell you.
And so, but hold on for a second. What
Sure.
I'm saying to you is, if I know Dad, but I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about any daughter. If I know my dad or my mom is going to talk about me, I am less likely to go to them and ask for help.
This is true.
And the very act of asking for help may give them the home they need to go to be safe. But I don't want my dad to judge me. I'm already ashamed of being abused and not knowing how to get out of it. Especially like with me, you're so smart, Jolanda.
And so strong. Everyone thinks you're so strong.
I mean, I'd won 4 national championships, United States championships, before I ever met him. And I was in that situation. And even when I was strong enough to get out, I was sharing. One of my teammates at U of H was like, so Jolanda, of all the women in the world I thought would let someone beat him, I never thought it was you.
Let's talk about that, because it could happen to any woman. You know, the strongest, who's perceived as the strongest woman,
across all
or man, because I know that during our
geographic,
hotline we get calls for men often when you're joining us for the hotline. So tell me about the right words, the conversation to have.
The conversation to have is to be empathetic, to listen, to validate, to say it's not your fault. You're not alone. There's help available. Let's connect you to resources, and to not judge, because you're absolutely right. When we work in schools around teen dating violence, that's one thing we want to be very clear about, is that kids are not going to go tell their parents. They're not. You can say, yes, you can talk to me about anything. Start that conversation, I don't know, when they're 3, 4, 5, that they know that that's a safe place to come. That kids are worried that you're going to judge, yes, that you're going to harm someone, and that's not going to be good for your family.
I would think the last thing I would want to do is tell my dad, because my dad might fill in the blank,
exactly, get a gun.
And then go to prison.
Yeah.
Because you can call the police.
And that you're not as a parent going to trust them anymore. And a lot of times, kids don't recognize, I mean, we know this about teen dating violence, they don't recognize that they're in an abusive relationship because they have so very little experience, and that all of that attention and that isolation and, you know, doting on them, they think, oh, that's a good thing. He must really like me because he wants to be with me and not with my friends.
And it sounds like dads, like Nate, I know you're doing the right thing. You're like, talk to dad. I know. I want to applaud you for trying to keep the communication open. I did want to ask you something about the NFL as we're moving forward. In your perspective, you know, the Ray Rice case, and we think of some other cases where players have gotten into trouble with the law, and it stays in the headlines for a while. Meantime, you have a team like the Texans. I know they place a high value on character. If you want to talk to me a little bit about that. And also, why I wish I heard more stories from the NFL about the married players, about the good guys. We're going to be talking about Ray Rice for a while. What do you think the NFL can do to use the good guys to help educate everybody about the right way?
Well, let's begin with a couple of teams in the NFL. We'll start with the Houston Texans. In fact, Bill O'Brien held his press conference on today. The Houston Texans have a zero tolerance for domestic abuse. That is the same thing that the San Francisco 49ers organization has stated publicly. They have a 0% zero tolerance for domestic abuse. What can the NFL do? Again, it goes back to instituting stiffer penalties. You got to be able to hit people where it really hurts.
Why doesn't the NFL have the same policy as some of these individual teams?
I think
the owners decide, right?
I won't say that they don't. I won't say that they don't have a policy, because obviously for teams to have certain policies, I would imagine that it trickles down from the organization.
Do you think it's as strict and as clear, and we're going to go on the record and we're going to say?
It's not as strict.
Why not?
Because the owners are the boss of the NFL commissioner. The NFL commissioner, how much latitude does he have to actually institute a policy like this that would somehow threaten the owners? And believe me, if an owner has a great player who is an abuser, and that player can't play, that hits the owner's pocketbook. Now, how are they going to control that? Are they going to be able to turn their heads and say, I'm going to ignore it? No, they can't ignore it. There's too much money on the table.
Do you think they've been ignoring it, just from your experience with other players? I mean, I think I know the. Do you think they've been ignoring it?
I think to a degree they have. And when you look at what happened in this latest issue, obviously with Ray Rice and, you know, Ray McDonald out there in San Francisco. With Ray Rice, obviously, a 2-game suspension, not enough to begin with. That should have been minimum 6 games and an extremely stiff fine. But no, they went 2 games because of what they thought was the right thing to do. No, not at all. You know, you have to start with a much stiffer penalty and work your way from there. Now, what they do, they hold the rookie symposiums, which are to teach life skills to the rookies. Rookies learn early, but now you got to stick with that. So the plan should be to institute something that allows these guys to go in, refresh what they learned during their rookie years, and continue throughout that,
it just
continue
seems like
with that program
that makes
throughout
sense,
their time.
especially a very strict policy, because you tell a guy who's just coming into the league, okay, these are the rules, and then you pay him millions and millions of dollars. They think that they're above everything else.
Some do. Some do believe that or think that they are above the law.
Yeah, it's good for us to put that, because there are a lot of good guys that want to keep pointing that out in the league.
In fact, the Houston Texans have a lot of great guys on their team. You know, and you can point to other teams. Green Bay Packers, Atlanta Falcons, they have a lot of good guys on the team who are not abusers.
And they have folks who are not only do they not abuse, they actually are advocates against domestic violence. And they stand up and take a stand and actually do something to help survivors. So
Jolanda, I see you.
There were 2 things that you said that I thought were incredibly important. The way that I was able to get out of my relationship was I had a friend. I want to give her props. Her name is Dr. Tamsin Valois. She went to law school with me. And I was being abused, and I remember one time I was in the boss office, the Black Law Students Association's office, and I was just bawling. And Tamsin walked into me because she had been in a relationship, and she, I guess, saw the signs. And she was the first person that saw me upset, and she didn't blame me. She said, "Sweetheart, you deserve better." She said, "If you and Gio need a place to stay, you can come stay with us, and you don't have to pay me any money." She was the first person who didn't have something smart to say. That helped me get out. Like, God is my witness. That helped me get out. And interestingly, I left my ex-husband on November 8th, 1995. I will remember that day till the day I died, because he almost killed me. And that's the day I left, and I never went back. I remember that day. I'm going to remember that day until I die. I say that it's traumatic. I'm extremely successful now by some people's estimation. And even when I think about it and I go back there, I'm clearly affected.
Right.
Because it wasn't me. It's not the person I know now, you know, to be me. And so I think it's important that we, again, validate and we don't judge. And I also think that when you go and you're talking about the NFL, it doesn't start when kids are good from the time the really good people, the really good athletes who are going to make it in the NBA or the NFL, they start when they're 8, they're beating 15-year-olds. I mean, let's face it. So we know who the good ones are. And the coaches identify them. In their AAU teams or their Pop Warner teams, they identify them. They know exactly who they are. When they get to middle school, they identify them. They protect them. Because every junior high coach and middle school coach wants a successful team. Every high school coach wants a successful team. Everybody wants that. Every college coach wants a successful team. So we can't just put it all on the NFL, because here's the problem. If you have a kid who from the time he's 8 has been above the law, you expect for him when he's 22 years old and he's making $20 million to think that someone can actually tell them what to do? They don't. And so we can't just leave it on the NFL. I think policy should be instituted from the bottom, because I'm a former athlete, and the athletes, you're worshipped because of your aggression.
This is true.
I mean, you make a living pounding your head.
And that's a societal thing.
Right.
There's so many layers here that we can get into. I wanted to talk to you, Rebecca. Jolanda talked about her plan, and it was a plan that came to her. Thank goodness for you and for your son. Tell me about that. I've heard you talk about what men and women need to do in this situation when they know it's time to go.
First of all, they have to know a hotline number, which I know you guys are great about publicizing, because they don't have to have all the answers. We've got trained staff who can help assess the lethality of their situation, who can, been doing this for 37 years, help them figure out a safety plan. We know, again, domestic violence is about power and control. And when that power and control is threatened, when the victim says they are going to leave that relationship, get out of that situation, the violence can escalate. That's a very real possibility. And so we want to help survivors of violence get out safely. And we've been doing this for a long time. We can help with that. If we can help them make a safety plan among their own resources, or we can throw some of our resources in as well.
All right. I want to thank all of you for coming in today and for your very unique perspectives. Jolanda, thanks so much for being so brave and telling your story.
Well, if I don't share, then people think they're out there alone. So
thank you. We'll see you next time after the newscast.